Everyday Samurai, Episode 26. Well, hello everyone. Fellow warrior scholars, greetings and welcome to Everyday Samurai, in service to your liberty and the security of a free state. Have you seen the recently released video footage out of Lakemore, Illinois, where a female law enforcement officer got a gun stuck in her face during a traffic stop? It's extremely intense, with lots of lessons to be learned here, and fortunately, only the bad guy winds up getting shot. The incident occurred in July of 2018, again in Lakemore, Illinois, when a female road patrol officer conducted a traffic stop on a suspicious vehicle in a rural suburban neighborhood around 5 o'clock in the morning. Of course, I'll provide a link to the video on YouTube in the show notes, so be sure to check out everydaysamurai.life/26 for the details. And while you're there, sign up to get on our email list. We'll keep you up to date with insights and information that I'm sure you'll find interesting and beneficial. Here is the narrative below the video on YouTube. Lakemore police officer Brianna Tedesco was on routine patrol at around 5 a.m. on July 24, 2018, when she came across an occupied SUV on a narrow gravel road near Four Seasons Boulevard and Sullivan Lake Road. The Lake County State Attorney's Office said that the man inside the car, Kenneth E. Martell, 36, of Meadville, Pennsylvania, was wanted for murder after he tied, robbed, beat, and stabbed to death 88-year-old Theodore Garver in his Beaver Township, Pennsylvania home 3 days prior. Officer Tedesco found Martell lying down inside the vehicle. She asked him for identification and he gave her a fake name. Officer Tedesco then asked Martell for written identification and he pointed a handgun at her head. It became apparent that the tender of a piece of paper was designed to distract Officer Tedesco from what Martell was about to do. Lake County State's Attorney Michael Nierheim said, "A struggle ensued and the two began fighting over the gun. Lakemore police officer Anthony Loiacano, who was the backup officer to Officer Tedesco, arrived at the scene. He fired one shot, which struck Martell in the head, after he saw the man was armed with a handgun in each of his hands. Martell was pronounced dead at the scene by paramedics. An autopsy showed that Martell had numerous traces of drugs in his system at the time of his death. Based upon the facts gathered in the investigation and a review of the applicable Illinois statutes, Officer Loiacano acted reasonably and appropriately. Martell's acts of deception and lies to Officer Tedesco were a prelude to ambush," Nierheim said in his released final report. So, what can we learn from this incident? Of course, we can celebrate the victorious outcome. Both cops survived and a dangerous hardcore criminal has been removed from society. The dashcam footage from the suspect vehicle's front shows the female officer Tedesco standing directly beside the driver's window. She has her flashlight under her left arm, her non-dominant or support side, and she receives the suspect's documents in her right hand, which is also her primary or weapon-wielding side. Her radio is mounted on the left side of her utility belt, and although we cannot see, it is safe to assume that her pistol is mounted on the right. We are also fortunate to get footage from both the vehicle dashboard as well as from Officer Tedesco's body camera. As the description indicated, the suspect initially gave the officer a fake name, and she asked for documentation, meaning a driver's license. The body cam shows the suspect looking down as he holds out a piece of paper. From what I could see, it doesn't look like a driver's license, and he presents it face up and vertical, almost like a shield to hide behind. Another report I saw described the toxicology report from the later autopsy, revealing the suspect had methamphetamine and marijuana in his system. You can see it in his eyes and the blank expression on his face that the guy was a meth head. If you've listened to our previous episodes, which, by the way, if you haven't done so, I encourage you to go back and listen because we build upon principles that reinforce one another to build a foundation for a more secure and prosperous world by protecting people and their property. So taken together, the principles of martial art and the principles of political economy work together because they are just two ways of revealing universal or axiomatic truths. These principles describe how reality operates and how human beings can live among one another in peace and cooperation for elevating living standards through production, trade, and entrepreneurship. Even in the ideal scenario, a veritable Garden of Eden, there will always be the need for a warrior protector, those willing to use force if necessary to repel violations of justice. We know that justice can only be logically discerned and interpersonally understood by use of private property boundaries. Otherwise, corruption and arbitrariness impedes and creates confusion. Based on a private property legal and social order, there is no room for the so-called war on drugs. No one has the right to interfere with another person's right to own property, including narcotic property. So anyone can cultivate, grow, produce, trade, or consume whatever narcotics they want, so long as in so doing, it does not interfere with or create what economists call negative externalities for others. Further, the so-called war on drugs is but a perversion of natural or scientific law, which you will recall is summed up in but 17 words. Do all you have agreed to do and do not encroach upon other people or their property. Telling people what they can or cannot own, use, trade, or consume is a violation of natural law. Only the erroneous belief in political authority can introduce such perversions to law and disturbances to natural order. This is why our mission at Everyday Samurai is to awaken consciousness. It is to dispel illusions and to cut through delusions perpetrated by the wily and cunning purveyors of enslavement, most notably through propaganda outlets in the mockingbird media and indoctrination centers known as public schools. Rightly armed with the principles of political economy and the real purpose of martial art, which is the science of government to uphold dignity, you realize that the only legitimate function of government is the protection of people and their property. The best way to arrange for this protection is through self-government, which is exactly what the U.S. Constitution was striving toward, with we the people performing the crucial role as the militia of the several states, according to Article 1, Section 8, Clause 15, to execute the laws of the Union. As Samuel Adams so clearly stated in 1772, natural rights consist of life, liberty, and property, along with the right to defend them in the best manner possible, as a duty of self-preservation. As economists, we know that human flourishing is a byproduct of the division of labor. While everyone has the right to defend themselves and their property, it is natural that some should specialize in security and justice. We also know through the principles of political economy that turning these functions over to political control and bureaucratic management will only pervert the delivery of security and justice away from customer satisfaction, because bureaucracies are bastions of socialism that cannot rationally allocate resources. Instead of satisfying authentic consumer demand, they divert resources into endeavors that satisfy politicians and high-level bureaucrats. This is why we are witnessing tremendous security vacuums in society. On the one hand, advances in technology and production capacity have generated unprecedented material well-being, especially for the poorest in the world. This has also yielded greater contentedness and less large-scale conflict. In short, the world has learned that cooperation and the division of labor are more effective at getting what you want than violence and aggression. The world at large is a much more peaceful and prosperous place than ever before. Reports and statistics from places like humanprogress.org help illustrate these facts. Yet at the same time, people feel less secure in their person and property, as well as their ability to shape their destiny. Particularly in the United States, we are less able to control our property, decide whom and how we will serve because of licensing, regulations, and other governmental interference. We have more infringements upon our right to own the means of security, meaning to keep and bear arms. We are further removed from the instruments of justice because of bureaucratic entrenchment. We are less likely to speak out or intervene when we see violations occurring because of liability concerns. We have become conditioned to not get involved, and this only gives political actors more free rein to implement policies that favor the ruling elite. I'll now read from Frank Herbert, author of the Children of Dune series, or the Dune Chronicles No. 3, where he describes this effect. Quote, "Governments, if they endure, always tend increasingly toward aristocratic forms. No government in history has been known to evade this pattern. And as the aristocracy develops, government tends more and more to act exclusively in the interests of the ruling class, whether that class be hereditary royalty, oligarchs of financial empires, or entrenched bureaucracy." End quote. The key words to notice here are entrenched bureaucracy and governments if they endure. Notice how Herbert is describing the tendencies of governments repeatedly, and he makes no distinctions for any type or form of government. It doesn't matter if there are term limits, campaign finance laws, popular democracy, Supreme Courts, or any other superficial modifications. For Herbert, it says no government in history can escape this pattern. The tendency to serve oligarchs and entrenched bureaucracies is embedded in the very nature of government. We talked about bureaucratic entrenchment earlier and can now couple this with Anthony DeJassay's description of political churn as the process by which even a minimal government will inevitably become a maximalist government. It is in the nature of all governments to grow. The ruler's dilemma demands that they continually expand their reach, gaining decision-making authority to ever more resources with which to buy support. Of course, more resources under government control, also known as the public domain, always comes at the expense of private property, or the voluntary domain, and there are no bounds to the voracious appetite of politicians and bureaucrats. In fact, maintaining their position demands it. Just like a drug addict, they must continually feed their habit, or their entire world will begin to implode. Like the addict, their bodies will revolt, meaning the body politic, and they will do desperate, depraved acts to get more. At the individual level, they will rob, beat, and murder the elderly, just like Kenneth Martell, the criminal that attacked Officer Tedesco in Lake Moore, Illinois. It comes as no surprise the drug addict will submit themselves to prostitution and other debauched acts to feed their habits. At the political level, there is no limit to the depravity office holders will stoop to in order to justify their control. Of course, politicians lie and make promises they know they cannot keep. Yet the lies that get them the most traction, that justify authorities and control of resources, are those that convince the public of a crisis that threatens their security. One of the best ways for political actors to exploit crisis is to shape them from beginning to end. Again, the relatively modern nation-state construct, with its monopoly on the use of force and decision-making in a given geographic territory, coupled with the power to tax, lends itself to this kind of exploitation. As Professor Hans Hermann Hoppe simply points out, when people can only turn to the state to settle disputes, the state will be incentivized to start disputes only to settle them in their own favor. The 1933 firebombing of the Reichstag building turned out to be deliberate action on the part of the German National Socialists that would ultimately usher in Adolf Hitler and the ultimate devastation of World War II. The 1962 proposal for Operation Northwoods, signed by the U.S. chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, was a planned false flag attack, replete with terrorist attacks on U.S. soil, allowing for civilian casualties, intended to justify offensive military action against the island nation of Cuba. Thankfully, President Kennedy disapproved the proposal, even though he did allow the Bay of Pigs invasion to take place in 1961. Yet these are just two examples illustrating how political actors use crisis to advance their agenda. The war on drugs is another example of manufactured crisis. As someone who entered law enforcement specifically motivated to get involved in the war on drugs and spent lots of time and money all over the world supporting counter-drug operations, I can tell you that there is no logic in it. In fact, it violates the very principles of good government, which is the protection of life, liberty, and property. Narcotics are property, and so is an individual's body. So long as they do not encroach upon other people or their property, people are, by right, free to do what they wish. The other side of living in a private property legal and social order is strict liability. If someone impaired through the use of narcotics or any other mind-altering substance encroaches upon other people or their property, the offender is subject to harsh penalties and even violent rebuke. In a free society, one that upholds private property as the unit of legal analysis, drug addicts would be rightly incentivized to not make their problem anyone else's problem. Again, in a free society, the right to keep and bear arms would not be infringed, and the use of force to protect life, liberty, and property would be encouraged. Transgressors would receive no sympathy when they suffer the consequences of their criminal activity. If the Constitution was actually operating as designed, militia companies for each neighborhood and community would be cooperating for mutual security through an integrated network, well regulated by communications, shared training events, and a variety of relationships. Sharing intelligence and lessons learned, particularly when enabled by modern technology, would allow adequate foreknowledge of threats, criminals, and other bad actors as they arose. Drug-fueled crime would be nearly eradicated, as communities would be much stronger and highly integrated with militia organizations fostering weapons proficiency, martial arts, and first responder training. Neighbors would know one another and easily spot outsiders or suspicious behavior. In a private property social order, trespassers would be run off, not to be passed on as a burden on some other community, but all the way out to the frontier or to some other refuge, most likely through private charities, churches, or civic groups with outreach programs for the needy. In these cases, too, substance abusers would need to comply with the rules of these groups in order to receive support. A good example of this is the Mormon Church, that has a very robust charity program for its members, yet also has work requirements to avoid any type of shirking or abuse. The important thing to examine as good political economists is the incentive structure. One adage that applies to welfare economics is that you get more of what you subsidize. It's another way of saying that people respond to incentives. If you're interested in the intelligence side of the art of war, there is no better tool for predictive analysis than economics. If there are no penalties or costs for free riding on the benevolence of others, people are more likely to take advantage of the situation. The more governments offer opportunities to free ride through redistribution programs like welfare, unemployment payments, and drug treatment, the occurrences of these conditions will increase. In other words, government drug treatment programs enable more drug abuse in society. This actually creates the crisis that justifies further government interventions, namely, the so-called war on drugs. We've talked previously on Everyday Samurai about the impossibility of waging war on abstract concepts, and the war on drugs is a perfect case in point. Just like you cannot wage war on terrorism, but only terrorists, you cannot wage war on drugs. Only drug users. Remember, war is about breaking things and killing people. It is the ground of survival or extinction, as Sun Tzu rightly pointed out over 2,500 years ago. Also in line with the art of war is the preference to keep things whole when weighing the costs and benefits of waging war. As Chapter 3 lays out, it is better to keep a nation, an army, a battalion, a company, a squad, an individual intact than to destroy them. Calamities ensue when throwing resources at protracted war. In Chapter 12 of The Art of War, Sun Tzu says that those angry can become happy again, but a destroyed nation cannot exist again. The dead cannot be brought back to life. Therefore, an enlightened ruler is prudent, the wise general is cautious, and the martial path is in pursuit of preserving resources and securing the nation. However, the modern nation-state with its monopoly status changes this incentive structure. Politicians and bureaucrats get to enjoy the resources and instruments of national power in the present without having to concern themselves about the long-term consequences, the second and third order effects. In other words, the current arrangement incentivizes the politically connected to consume as much as they can, as fast as they can, without any concern for the actual costs. Because people do respond to incentives, incentives matter. This is true just as much for drug addicts as it is for politicians, and the two actually oftentimes overlap. A politician can indeed be a drug addict. Even if they are not substance abusers in the conventional sense, the one thing we do know is that politicians are addicted to power. They are addicted to spending other people's money and the benefits they receive from holding high office. The founders of the United States understood this and designed a government where authorities were diffuse and therefore less likely to feed the habits of the power-hungry. The Constitution for the United States, while being the inheritor of several hundred years of legal traditions with each iteration being another incremental step, was indeed a quantum leap toward liberty. a sincere attempt at forming a more perfect union. However, and quite obviously, the Constitution has largely failed to guarantee the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. James Madison's theory found in Federalist No. 10 about the Union being a safeguard against domestic faction has largely proven false, as we see the general government working for the benefit of special interest groups at the expense of the taxpayer. The pharmaceuticals industry government complex is just one case in point. Returning to Herbert and his description from the Dune Chronicles, we can see that his prognosis is more accurate. Governments, if they endure, tend to morph into serving oligarchs and an entrenched bureaucracy. It is for this reason that the Declaration of Independence logically deduces that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of the ends for which it was contracted into existence, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. In other words, to avoid falling into dysfunction that inevitably arises whenever governments endure, or whenever they enjoy monopoly status for any length of time, the contract for services needs to be severable. That's what alter or abolish means. That's what the British colonists did with the Lee Resolution of July 2, 1776. And the Wikipedia page for Declarations of Independence lists about 100 other countries that have done so as well. Keep in mind that a nation, a country, or a people are also abstractions. While abstractions are useful terms for language, these things don't actually exist. These things do not have physical mass or take up space within the manifest world. They are but ideas. Only individuals exist. Only individuals act. And only individuals with their physical property can be protected. Similarly, only individuals can protect themselves, others, and their justly held property. Individuals can only know, and I mean really understand, the practical means of delivering security services through the observation of borders and boundaries. Respect for property needs to be a cultural norm because there are never enough security providers in a given population to protect what needs to be protected. This is why culture is so important. For the most part, people recognize that good behavior is in their interest as well. Mutual respect allows for cooperation and security. I respect what is yours and you respect what is mine. That way we can develop our resources without having to always be watching over our shoulders. Otherwise, chaos would reign and destruction would be the norm. Fortunately, most people realize that cooperation is more productive than predation. You see, it's not necessary for everyone to set aside their differences and come together as one family or any other nice-sounding platitude in order to find peace and elevate the human condition. Again, these types of abstractions are the fog that obscure the corrupt ambitions of self-serving politicians and bureaucrats. Self-interest, on the other hand, when acting within the voluntary sector and outside the monopoly enjoyed by the modern nation-state, is sufficient to explain why people will actually cooperate in those areas where they actually have mutual interests. As the great economist Ludwig von Mises wrote, as far as man is able to realize that greater productivity is achieved through the division of labor, human action itself tends toward cooperation and association. Man becomes a social being not in sacrificing his own concerns for the sake of a mythical society, but in aiming at an improvement in his own welfare. So rational people can see the benefits of working together for their own reasons. They either logically understand that a group of people constantly at war with one another will be incredibly poor, or intuit that moral dictum that they will reap what they sow. In either case, there is no need for a great overlord or central planning committee to convince people that cooperation is in their best interest. When people honor their agreements and respect the dignity of others, a society flourishes. That is why the secession of the American colonies from Great Britain was the shot heard round the world. The U.S. Constitution was the first attempt to establish government along the principles of common law, derived from the intersection of virtually every faith tradition and scientifically deduced. Despite all its shortcomings, America flourished because the people were well versed in common law, had high trust, meaning they understood that they would reap what they sow, and largely maintained order among themselves. It's important to remember that historically speaking, bureaucratic police departments are a recent phenomenon. Up until the late 1830s, patrolling was a shared duty among the citizenry, and some more affluent cities contracted private security agencies into existence to patrol on their behalf. Even in the most morally grounded society and those that understand the benefits of social cooperation, there will still be those outliers that would rather make their living through predation. There are always some members of the population that act upon their baser impulses and prey upon others. This is why there will always be a need for a warrior protector in society. There will always be a place for martial specialists to serve their fellow man through a willingness and readiness to violently repel transgressors. While it is natural to extend and deepen the division of labor, including security functions, it is essential to always retain martial capabilities for yourself. Completely outsourcing it leaves you subject to the possibility of those that do not honor their agreements. This is why the U.S. Constitution, even with all of its flaws, declared well-regulated militia, meaning the whole body of the people aside from public officials, as necessary to the security of a free state. It's not optional or nice to have, but necessary. Rather than leaving law enforcement in the hands of entrenched bureaucracy and politicians, we, the people, are ultimately responsible for executing the laws, repelling invasions, and suppressing insurrections. The people are a party to the contract, each individual. It's natural to task some of this out to realize the benefits of specialization and comparative advantage. Yet, becoming dependent upon government for security and justice inverts the structure designed by the Constitution. It is also why there are tremendous security vacuums present in modern society. As political economists, well versed in incentive structures, we know that we have to make the costs of predation high, the penalties for violating scientific law severe, and ensure standards are universally applied to criminals of all varieties, whether they be street addicts or aspiring tyrants. This is why now more than ever it is important for every citizen to reassert their rights to self-government. I know there is a long road ahead on the path to restoring liberty and contractual self-government. I also know that we have more to discuss about the shooting incident at the traffic stop in Lakemore, Illinois, and I'm about to jump back into it, but first I'd like to give you a tool for seeing through the confusion and mitigating the stress of hectic modern life. That tool is mindfulness, and just like strength training or martial skill, mindfulness is developed through meditation practice. The mindfulness I'm talking about has nothing to do with being spaced out or achieving some out-of-body experience. Mindfulness, in this case, is about reducing the constant chatter running in your mental background and being clear and aware and directing your focus. Those steeped in samurai-related martial arts have probably heard the term mushin, or no mind. It's a way of describing the clear-headed awareness of a mind free from distraction and able to notice and respond to whatever arises in the moment. It's what every warrior needs to deal with threats that emerge in the reality we are facing, whether it be petty criminals or the rising tide of oppression. Build your mindfulness practice in as little as 12 minutes a day with Zen 12, a powerful technology that gives you the benefits of deep meditation in a short amount of time. Go to everydaysamurai.life/Zen12 today. That's everydaysamurai.life/Zen12. That mushin state of mind is what's necessary to sense danger and move into action as appropriate, again, through training. Now, when you look at the video of Officer Tedesco, you'll notice she's standing squarely, directly outside the driver's window. There are two schools of thought about this, and in my case it's literal because the two samurai-related schools of swordsmanship I study have two different perspectives, at least at the basic level. In Aikiken, the body is always bladed at a 45-degree angle. We call this Sankaku Hanmi no Kamae, meaning the triangular half-body posture. The idea is to adopt a low profile that projects power at a fine point, like a wedge that splits through an opponent's guard. Law enforcement largely adopted a modified version of this in what is called the interview stance, where the weapon side of the body is held back to make it more difficult for a suspect to grab an officer's pistol from the front. Alternatively, in Tenden Nishin-Ryu, the basic sword postures and initial paired forms all adopt squared position with the body facing forward. We are instructed to have the feeling of pushing a wall with our hips. Going through law enforcement SWAT training, I was taught to square my body to a target because it puts the body armor where it can provide the most protection. However, SWAT guys are usually wearing thicker armor than the average patrol officer's concealable vest, and I tend to bristle at any strategy that is premised upon absorbing punishment. As Mr. Miyagi in The Karate Kid wisely said, the best block is no be there. Whether you blade your body or square up to your initial opponent is just one factor of consideration within the operating environment. There is also the need to choose one's ground, and this is particularly true with traffic stops. Samurai swordsmanship is really the best way to develop an understanding of combat geometry. Nothing presents the angles better. Law enforcement officers can take these lessons to heart and readily apply them to their patrol tactics. Officer Tedesco would have been in a much better position to deal with the suspect's gun if she were not standing directly in front of the window. Good tactics require leveraging the body of the vehicle as well. Standing alongside or behind the central pillar of the car's frame, basically where the front door closes and the rear door hinges. It's not much, but it provides a physical barrier between the officer and the suspect. It also makes the suspect look or reach behind them from where they are sitting in order to target the officer. Again, understanding the angles in combat geometry make it more difficult for our opponents and allow us to assert our will from a superior position. Additionally, when you watch the video, you'll notice that she is looking down, fumbling with her notepad, and trying to read the piece of paper that the suspect handed her, which we learned earlier was a ruse designed to distract her while he pulled his gun. I know what it's like to have too many things to deal with while conducting a traffic stop: flashlight, radio, pen, pad, etc., and managing them effectively, especially at night, is something every cop has to deal with. That is why good tactics requires collecting the driver's info from a safe angle, such as using that central pillar, and then moving to the back of the patrol car to make the radio calls. You can only do one thing at a given time effectively. Multitasking is a fool's errand. So this is another reason why practicing mindfulness is so crucial for situational awareness. All war is based on deception, as Sun Tzu teaches, and the enemy will try to distract or divert our attention. Setting our center and choosing our ground, and knowing ourselves, keeps us grounded in awareness, harnessing the power of now and being fully present and unperturbed no matter what occurs. In addition to mentally setting our center, the physical act of centering also makes it difficult to be uprooted from our power base. When you watch the video and stop during the initial few seconds of the assault, you will notice that Officer Tedesco raises up in response to the gun being put in her face. Number one, she is completely surprised by the event, and while her initial reaction is to grab it with her right hand, her gun hand, she also raises up on the balls of her feet and then lifts her left leg. Instinctive reactions reveal much about a person's prior training because we will respond in combat how we have trained. There is no time for thought in the heat of the moment, and programming effective responses needs to be done in advance. Sometimes our natural reactions will get us killed, and this is why we have to program a new operating system, one that is designed for the arena of combat. The samurai-related arts have a term called ukimi, or floating body. In some senses, a floating body can be a good thing when you enjoy freedom of movement. However, a floating body is a bad thing when it is you being lifted up off your base and able to be pulled into the direction of the opponent's choosing. This is what happens to Officer Tedesco because the suspect pulls back in the vehicle and she is almost brought in through the window. We can be glad that Officer Tedesco survived, and we can also be thankful for the lessons this video reveals. A martial artist trained in samurai systems instinctively drops their center when presented with a threat. We should always be thinking of how to make the body on the one hand immovable to an opponent's will, yet light and floating to allow our freedom of movement. This may sound paradoxical at first, and this is also why only training can reveal the deeper mysteries. Reading books from sword masters like Miyamoto Musashi's Gorin no Sho, the Book of Five Rings, always points back to experience and self-study. Miyamoto Musashi concludes his discussion of the way of combat strategy in the Earth Scroll with, "Those who desire to learn the way must take each detail contained within these scrolls to heart, scrutinizing them carefully." Ultimately, he sums up that the way is in training. A commitment to daily training is what every warrior philosopher on the dual path of scholarly and martial art needs to ground themselves in the principles of liberty and self-government. Choose your ground, set your center, and be fully present, ready to respond. I too will now close with words of thanks for your being here, sharing this path and making your everyday walk the warrior's walk. I also appreciate your sharing the show, helping to build a growing community of warrior scholars in service to liberty. We are creating a culture that demands self-government and human dignity. The road may be long, but again, the way is in training. We've also got some great shirts with my favorite quote from Miyamoto Musashi available with our redesigned logo. They're nice, soft, tri-blend cotton that feels really good on your skin, while at the same time helping you remember Musashi's advice about the warrior's walk. Pick up yours today at everydaysamurai.life/logo. If you haven't yet done so, get on our mailing list to stay up to date with news and insights. Go to everydaysamurai.life today to sign up. Again, like, share, subscribe, and offer a positive review on iTunes or the podcast service of your choice. It's all about expanding awareness and building momentum on the path toward liberty. Until next time, stay sharp, stay aware, and be well.